Philip Hughes. I'm actually CEO of a company called Philip1of2.mov, which is a wealth development firm. And my background, one of the strongest influences on my life has been my mom, who was a single-parent mom raising 4 kids, and by herself, and seeing the struggles that she went through as growing up in the 70s, and really helping us, informing us, and she was a very, very strong woman. She, helped us to understand, our responsibilities. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful was that she wasn't a very religious individual, but she was very, very spiritual. And and she gave me a Bible, a children's Bible, years ago when I was about 10 years old. And I remember reading it. And even though my brothers and sisters, they went to Catholic schools and such, my mom kept me in the public arena, and I went to public schools most of my life up until the time I went to a private school. And as a result, I think a lot of my mom's philosophy sort of rubbed off on me. And it wasn't until I acknowledged that I had a very, very intense spiritual side. But one of the things in which when I looked around at what I saw was going on within the churches and within the faith world, I was really taken aback, and I actually became very, very critical to some degree of religiosity. But I always recognized that there was something more. It wasn't until college in which I had opportunity to, because I always had a real strong interest in young people. I went to school, I was a pre-med student, and until I ran into organic chemistry. But I really found my passion, and that was working with young people. And I fell in love with a group of young kids and became director of a program called Little Ujamaa, which in Kiswahili, Little Ujamaa means cooperative economics, and also is translated to mean familyhood. And we had about 22 or so kids from the Middletown, Connecticut community that participated within this program. And I really, it was amazing to me, this, the lives of these young people and what they were going through. Because even in this small town, many of these children, they're going through issues that children of the larger cities and larger communities were going through. And so, we took this little program that started out as an arts and crafts program, and we turned it into an adolescent development program. And so we began to focus in on their issues and what they were dealing with. And what was amazing to me was that, I was able to develop such a very powerful relationship with these kids and their families. And a lot of the families were directly had migrated from the South, and still carried a lot of Southern traditions and such. But my goal was to help these kids to have a larger, more expanded view of the world. And so many of them who grew up in the Middletown community, less than an hour and a half from New York, many of them had never been to New York City. And so it really amazed me that a lot of these kids seem to lack a lot of information, education, and a more expanded worldview. So we began to, as a part of our program, we definitely took many trips to New York, and from taking them from the Bronx Zoo to the Dance Theater of Harlem, to a number of different things that really helped them to understand exactly what this world was all about. But one of the challenges I really, as I really became so close to these kids, and sort of felt like at the age of 21 that I had about, I felt like I was father of 22 kids, and as we were going through our various experiences, and as we were dealing with issues from teen pregnancy to parents who are on drugs, to all sorts of challenges that these young people were facing, I really began to understand that there's a more to this. That that even though I ended up getting a degree in psychology with an emphasis on child development, I really began to understand that that there was something more that I needed personally. Because the issues I was dealing with, I was trying to deal with out of the knowledge base that I had, which was insufficient to deal with the challenges. Especially when we ran into a situation where one of the children in our program, he was killed as a result of just riding a bike with his little cousin. And even though I had, it was just one of the most challenging times that we had to deal with. But I was actually kind of psychologically prepared for that. Reason being is because there were things that were going on spiritually that I really didn't fully understand at the time. but I sort of knew that this sort of situation would happen. One thing I was unprepared for was dealing with the reaction of the other kids and really helping them to sort of cope and deal with it, and it really took everything out of me. And I really began to sort of realize that definitely I needed more, and I ended up leaving Middletown, Connecticut, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. I had to leave. I had to. That there was a calling for me back here in Cincinnati. And I wasn't in the Lord at the time, but I felt a leading of some form. I felt like that I was being led. And one of the things that I really, psychologically I realized and practically I realized is that we needed, as a community, we needed access to resources. And so that's what led me to, I spent a year as a social worker, but I also got involved with the insurance and finance industry. And I really began to realize that we had to, as a community, especially in the African American community, we had to grow ourselves economically. We had to take more financial responsibility. And I really wanted to learn so I can bring more information and education back to our community. And so that sort of started me on a process of really studying the financial marketplace and really getting understanding, so I can really sort of share with folks, help people sort of begin to sort of see themselves differently in the marketplace, and really begin to just educate folks. And I sort of found a calling in that arena. One of the things that, as I began the process, and God said, I actually had an opportunity to run across a gentleman who, I was working with in the marketplace in a nonprofit organization, and he was the chairman of it, and I ended up becoming the executive director of this particular organization. And I wasn't saved at the time, but this gentleman, he was actually a pastor of a church. And and he was incredibly articulate, very well educated. He was actually a professor as well. And it wasn't until I had an opportunity to talk with him one-on-one, and then to see him preach at church. Because when he preached, I had an opportunity to be able to go to his church, and I saw him preach, and he just blew me away. It really was, out of all the experiences that I had, I began to understand that it's not about my negative view of religion and people who are quote-unquote religious. But one of the things I began to realize is that it's about my personal relationship with God, and I had to work on that. When I attended the service on January 1st, 1994, it was a New Year's night service as such, and it was actually, I had arrived after, actually most of the service was over. I was actually looking for a good friend of mine, and I just felt so intensely led to be able to be there that night. And I was looking for this friend, and I was going down the aisles, and one of the pastors, when I sort of came to myself and said, wait a minute, what am I doing? There were people who had fallen out all around me, people who were in the spirit. And when I sort of kind of realized that I was just sort of walking around, I started heading towards the door, or headed towards the back, and one of the pastors grabbed me, and she asked me, that I need to go and ask the Lord for what I really wanted. And the pastor of the church was actually preaching, was praying with a number of people in the front of the room, and she led me to the front. And and after he prayed with the last person, he looked up and he said, "Oh, Philip," and he asked me, "Well, what did I want the Lord to do for me?" And basically, I said, and first I was a little puzzled. Then out of my mouth said, "I want a clean heart." And God, He prayed for me, and and at that point, I truly received the Lord, and that began my journey with, in terms of having a clear-cut relationship with God. And since that time, God has really literally transformed my life. I had a very strong involvement with my family, with the young people in my family, and God really began to help me to understand, not only my purpose, but also really began to sort of help me to get an understanding of what I'm really called to do is help them to uncover their purpose. And I also found out what my passion is. And I thought it was really working with young people, but actually it's about development, helping people to be able to grow and become more. And also at that time, God really took me on a journey to really study wealthy people and how folks are, how folks in our country have generated incredible wealth. And as I began to do that and study wealthy people, going back and looking at the Andrew Carnegies, the Henry Fords, the sort of the who's who of wealthy people in our country, one thing I began to realize as I looked at the principles that they used in order to acquire great financial wealth were the same principles found right there in the Word of God. And one of the things, and so that really caused me to really think about the fact that there seemed to be a disconnect between the practices for those of us who are believers and those of us who are reading the Word of God in terms of what we are implementing in the marketplace versus what I saw, wealthy people doing. And so, and I said, wait a moment, here's the Word of God. Here is, and yet here are here's what the Word of God says when it comes to walking our faith out in the marketplace and employing certain principles. And here's what we are actually doing. So I sort of feel like we as a body weren't receiving the fruits of our labor because we weren't employing the right principles. And there was always seemed to be a strong, a strong challenge for Christians in the marketplace. And so I began to, I began to define myself early on as a marketplace minister. I didn't feel as if I was called to the church. I didn't feel as if I was called to the formal church or to to become a pastor, preacher, teacher, so on and so forth. I felt like I was called to minister in the marketplace. And this was 12 plus years ago. And but I found it to be a very lonely sort of situation. And because even where I was at as a church, even though they were sort of cutting edge, it was still sort of new to them when they talk about marketplace ministry. And so I really didn't understand exactly what I was doing or how I was doing it.